It was a pleasant day in Autun, the day that saw the final farewell of the medieval period's greatest sculptor, Gislebertus. The music that would have accompanied his burial, the day of wrath, was an epitome of his work. Judgment, repentance, redemption, and terror. Just as his death chant reflected the cathartic throes of a soul's sin, purgation, judgment, and redemption, so did his stone monuments. The master is fittingly buried with the same words that he so powerfully visualized. He embarks on the same drama of salvation he depicted. He was the dramatist of the beginning and the end. The stage upon which Gislebertus' dramas of purge and redemption would take place was the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare, Saint Lazarus. Here we see an ambitious, virile artist taking on the great questions of human life, the course and drama of sin and salvation. His reliefs would be attempts at putting the viewer through a spiritual catharsis. Showing the effects of sin would drive the viewer to purge it and surrender unto God. But where to begin? The beginning itself, no less. Gislebertus' journey of salvation begins with the sculpture of Eve, and the fall of man to sin is the beginning of the Gislebertan journey. Here, he sculpts round and plump curves, marking her out as a classically formed temptress. The temptress is surrounded by a dense forest of lush plant life. Straightforward enough, but in order to gain the viewer's attention, Gislebertus adds a psychological layer. The trees are snake-like, and the sculptor communicates that sin creeps up on our hearts and minds like an evil snake. The arm that grabs the fruit becomes a snake itself, and Eve turns away, repulsed by the inevitable fall in her nature. Her tortured shunning of her deed grabs the viewer. We have a Greek tragedy of inevitability. In depicting Eve's ambivalent struggle with sin, a struggle she lost, Gislebertus makes the viewer feel the same. Gislebertus' sculpture behooves the first step to salvation, recognition. The viewer recognizes how sin may be taking over his or her own life and identifies with Eve. The sculpture is a tragic call to purge, as well as a depiction of what sin does to a mortal. Next, Gislebertus must take the viewer on the next step, showing them the crux of the journey and the trauma that a fall causes. Standing on the tympanum of Saint Lazare, the climax of salvation's journey is reached. Judgment. After recognizing inner sin and its degenerating effects, the viewer is now confronted with the fork in the path. Purge that sin and be blessed, or cling to it and be damned. The link with Eve is almost obvious. The archivolts reflect the shrubbery of Eve's garden. The fall of man leads to God's judgment. In a further attempt to have the viewer identify personally with the imagery, Gislebertus places emphasis on the human experience of the momentous decisions. Christ's arms divert attention to either side. The sculptor is inviting us to place ourselves among the rest of humanity on that terrible day. Humans are shown slumped and terrified, coming into contact with both contorted demons and graceful angels. The former are personifications of the sin that results in death, the latter, the grace of redemption. While the damned, those who refuse to purge their sin, are shown suffering, Those who did undergo the purge are rejoicing. This humanity-centered dichotomy further emphasizes the call to purge. In the images of the redeemed, the next step of salvation's journey comes in, the surrender unto God. After recognizing and purging sin, we are given the award, peace. Nestled into a building that resembles a cathedral, the redeemed are granted life everlasting. Here, the sculptor shows the fruit of purge and surrender, as opposed to the fruit of sin in Eve. The viewer is given a satisfying incentive for sloughing off their sin. The path of grace is shown. But it is not enough to simply show the happy ending of the cataclysm. The artist must warn of the opposite, more violent end. Perhaps the most despair-ridden part of the Bible, the death of Judas represents the final sum of sin's wages. Death. A gasping and contorted Judas, reminiscent of the damned from the Last Judgment, receives the just payment. He did not embark on salvation's journey. In a brutally funny twist of artistic poetry, Judas is hanged from a tree that reflects those of Eve. Sin has reached its logical conclusion, from temptation and downfall, through judgment, to death. Gislebertus issues a stern monolithic warning on what happens when you fall off the path to salvation. You'll end up like Judas. Be wary, Gislebertus warns. But what of the hope of redemption? Sure, he had done justice to its reward in the Last Judgment, but perhaps the Judas capital, though essential to teaching the viewer of its punishment, would leave a nasty taste in a viewer's mouth. An element of impossibility? This defeats the whole purpose of Christianity, which espouses hope in God. Though he had shown the path of salvation, he must give the impetus for the whole undertaking, the spark that ignites the viewer's inner flame of yearning for that redemption, that peace in the apartments of heaven. That impetus was hope in faith and revelation. The next capital would fit the bill perfectly. The dream of the Magi. The moment when the kings are warned to avoid Herod on their way back from the adoration of Jesus. An angel comes and awakens one of the Magi. It is an awakening both physical and spiritual. The viewer is called to awaken from the slumber of sin and indifference. The angel points to the star of Jesus' birth, the ray of hope for redemption from the horrors of damnation. However, the star is only a beacon if our eyes are open. If not, then we stay in a deadly sleep. But the light is there, and it is an ecstatic hope. A hope that lies at the root of Gislebertus' entire system. And it was a hope that would carry him into the next world. Strangely, Gislebertus didn't leave behind a depiction of paradise, the boon of salvation. But he did leave something more human, more urgent, the road to get there. It would seem like the reward was implied in the struggle of the journey, a journey forged in agony and sweat.